you very much. Really nice to be here. Quite great to have a mixture of people. I think it makes it really interesting. So hopefully the questions that come in can kind of help other learners from different angles. And I really hope that I can kind of plug the gap between those that are new and kind of coming into their career at an early stage, but also those that are developing. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at AI. We're going to look at the where you can use it, how you can use it, what you will use it for, but also why. Like, you have to use these things in a way that you can justify. Of course, with all design, you still have to justify your decisions, and that's one of the things we'll touch on. So a bit about me. Well, 2025 is tough as a designer. I think I've observed that. I've seen lots of changes in my career. I've been a designer for over 20 years. I've been a graphic designer, an information architect, a digital designer, a UX designer, UI designer, lead designer, senior manager of design teams. So hopefully that will help me to bring lots of experience that I can share with you. But one of the things I've observed, especially the last few years, and this year is no exception, is that it's really tough being a designer. There's lots of expectations on what you should be doing. You have to play lots of roles, wear lots of hats. Budgets are much tighter now, so sometimes you don't get the luxury of having a user research team, or even sometimes having other designers to help you. So I think this is really interesting as to, now that we've got AI as something that we can leverage and lean on, how do we do that? And ultimately, how can we use that to make our process a lot more streamlined? Please feel free to connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn. Drop me a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topics, any feedback. As any designer, always welcome to learning and adapting. So it feels like the future is here. And I think this is evident by one of these quotes that I pulled out of Reddit. I actually came across this last year, and it felt slightly still futuristic. But I want to read it because it's super interesting to see how far we've already come just in the last 12 months. I think AI could have a firm place in design in the future. Like, I can imagine a point where I'm communicating casually as I would to a human in order to describe the design I want, or creating really quick, rough sketches and having Figma translate that into clean, consistent components. Imagine just directing another designer to create the design you want, except that designer doesn't get mad at you for creeping over their shoulder, and this designer also works instantaneously. So essentially taking away the need to use all of the tools, the interface, and speeding up the process and steps it takes to do any given task. I also think that we could get to a point where AI, it could know how users behave based on layout, hierarchy, content, colors, spacing, and be able to show you estimated heat maps and conversions on the fly as you design, and also suggest changes that can improve that. It goes on. But I just think this is fascinating because when I read this initially, these things hadn't yet happened. They were in their infancy, and now almost all of these things have come to fruition. I think the one that I haven't seen is maybe where it's kind of real-time conversion, but I suspect that does exist in some of the B2B products on the market, but they can be quite expensive. So what I'm going to do is contextualize this for you, because it's really important to understand that each tool and where they can be used, and kind of also just to kind of pin it to something. And this should look fairly familiar. It's a triple diamond. The double diamond you'll probably have learned in your course design process. But I like to see it connected to the delivery work stream, because essentially as designers, that's what you're handing over into, you're executing. And it has to be done in a way for that to be possible. So if we were to dig a bit deeper into some of these, and don't worry, these slides are available, so you can always have a look back at these, you'll see there's lots and lots of different activities. And this is a model that is not going to be the same for everybody. The workplaces that you're in will differ for sure. It depends on the maturity of your organization, depends on the team structure, depends if you're development led. But highlighted a few things. These are just some of the things that, without even thinking too much about it, I already use this AI to help with. It'll be in different degrees, sometimes more in depth than others, but just looking at them, we've got kind of research side, user problems like defining, that's a really good one, coming up with statements, clarifying things, helping to set up workshops, helping to run workshops, content creation. Some of the challenges I've observed with designers is that they struggle sometimes with colors and font selection, especially if they're early on in their career, because that takes a lot of practice. Wow, this is where something like an AI tool can actually really start to help. Does it replace you for understanding what good looks like? No, you still have to train your eye. That still is a learning process, but you can still use it as a really great collaboration tool. So we're going to take some of these, we're going to go a little bit deeper into them. So ultimately, we're looking at discover, design, and build. Those are the three cycles as part of a product design process. We look at the where, the what, the how, the why that we can use some of these tools in. A few tools, there are so many. There are so many, and hopefully I can narrow down some of the options for you, but I would also equally love to hear if you have used any yourself that aren't on the list, or also your experiences when you have. I won't go too much into some of the Figma ones because they're probably the ones that are closest to you and the tools that you're using. The ones in yellow are the ones that I'll probably drill more into because they're the ones that I have personally favored, apart from a few that I have just recently come across that I wanted to share. I say there are a lot. There's been so much pivoting and changing from some of these companies, and some of them have done much better than others. And some of them, when they originally launched, their features were a lot stronger, so they kind of had a better following. So slowly, you see the market change and some of the products and services fall back, and then you get a few kind of leaders in the market. So initially there were it was even worse. There was just an overwhelming amount of products being launched, and now they're getting better quality. You'll probably notice that if you play around with some. And yeah, there's some that are kind of standouts to me. So the first stage, discover, understanding the problem we are designing for. This isn't always that easy. Sometimes we're given a lot of ambiguous direction, sometimes no direction. Sometimes we get a brief, sometimes it's not very clear what the problem is. Sometimes you need to get alignment with that problem. And actually, I think AI is really, really helpful for this. So how can we use it? Here's just a quick example of how I've used it previously in a piece of work. I was in a vertical that was new to me, kind of new, a little bit parallel to another industry I'd worked in. But there's always things that you don't know about as a designer. You're not an expert in every single area. However, at your fingertips, just like with the internet, we now have AI to help with that, and a very kind of amazing conversational tone that you can have. So it's like you're sitting next to an expert and talking to them. So one of the first things I did for this piece of work was I just wanted to know about the users. Didn't have much insight. We didn't have great data. Another very common challenge in an organization. Sometimes the data exists, but it's in different teams, so you can't get hold of it. And you don't always have the luxury of time when you're connected to a work cycle where there's weeks, days go by, weeks go by. It's quite important to stay on top of things. So for me, I just tapped into ChatGPT. That was just an easy go-to. Just tell me about this kind of customer. And then as the conversation evolves, it's almost given me direction, like, oh, would you like to know about this? And I was like, yeah, I would actually, but that's not a question I would have thought about asking. So that's a really nice starting point when you're working on a piece of work where you're not familiar with the context, the customer type, some of the language. So you can really use it as just to kick things off. Another one, because it was in a space of sustainability, I wanted to understand about the build. Like, if I'm designing, should I be conscious of certain things? What should I be conscious of? I knew there was a lot of talk around the consumption of certain designs because of like if there was a lot of video, for instance, or certain colors that were used. But I didn't know enough. I felt like I needed to know more. So I used that as a bit of a direction. And then it kind of, went on. I knew part of the brief it was to do a certain thing, and it was to do with creating an experience, but actually multiple experiences. So just kicking the tiles of it and seeing what could it come up with? What might it say to me in terms of like helping me shape the brief a bit more, the brief that didn't really exist. It was up to me to gather the requirements. It was up to me to shape it. Well, one of the other things I see with designers is if they don't have a clear brief, they sometimes are just paralyzed with where to start. You can't be like that when you're working. You have to come up with the answers. And if they're the wrong answers, that's okay. That's generally part of pushing your ideas forward. So you can use some of these AI tools to really help with that, help you to formulate a plan for a plan, and then use that to play back and say, this is what I'm thinking, or this is what I think we need to do. And then you get the feedback and then you iterate, etc., etc. But if you don't do anything, there's just no movement, and it's nobody else is going to help you really. Just kind of building on from that, I loved how it broke it down into things like the visual and emotional engagement, and then it even looked at accessibility. Didn't go into like loads of depth around each of these things, but of course, towards the end, you can always prompt and dig deeper where things come up that you're like, yeah, actually, that's a really good point. Again, just like you would have if you were talking to a colleague. Another tool I find really helpful for things around the kind of initializing research, kind of getting some foundation, is Perplexity. It's slightly more on the research side. It's a bit more of an advanced tool. I love it because it's so clear and concise, and it always citates, like it has references, and the way it breaks down the information it feels very thorough. And that can be quite important when you're researching something because you want to make sure that things are as accurate as possible. Ultimately, if you're going to be creating a design and your inputs are not solid, then it's going to have a knock-on effect. And that can be problematic if you're in some environments like healthcare or financial services. How do we use it? Again, you can kind of start to have this conversational element, follow up with it. It's amazing Perplexity in terms of the amount of data sources it can tap into, but also the way that it processes it. It's a bit different to ChatGPT, so I would always encourage you to test out the different models. I'll touch on some of them. There's quite a few dominant ones in the market. You've probably heard of Claude, Gemini, etc. And then there's very specific tools that can be used in design for things like animation or video. We won't touch on those, but I might kind of hint to them towards some of the later sessions. I mentioned Claude, so that's another model that's available. It's slightly different in that it's less of a research-based one and it's a little bit more on the creative side. I quite often will take the same prompt and just test it across them. That's just for my own learning. And again, I would encourage you to do something similar. Baymard is one of the newer tools that I've looked at. If you've not used Baymard, it's a really nice resource to have as a designer. It has loads and loads of research, covers things like heuristics, psychology. It's a paid and free option, so you can get access to quite a lot of free content. They've just launched a tool as well. This one is to do with kind of analysis, so it's more on the UX audit side, and it ties that to very specific things, generally the heuristics. So I tested this out with a local council just to see how does it fare? How good is it? I mean, I read a few reviews. Most of the reviews kind of were more to do with the content or the aspects that were behind the paywall. That is a challenge with some of these models as they become better and more robust, they then start to charge, so you don't always get access to it. But I'm going to give you some options with some of the tools that I know are accessible financially. So what this does is you can plug a website in. You get, I think, a couple to do on the free version, and then it will do an audit for you. It will give you a kind of heat map style feedback as to how it's faring. I purposely put this one in because it frustrates me. There's lots of things on it that don't make sense, from the language that they use all the way through to where things are and how they categorize it. So the information architecture is a little bit dubious. So it was interesting to see what it came back with. And again, I think it's quite nice, not only you can do this for competitor analysis, but you can also do this just to see the language that is used when they're talking about heuristics. And the reason is because some of these can be quite good for justifying some of your design decisions. You know, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this over this? And this becomes really important with stakeholder management. If you can confidently justify things, your conversations with stakeholders and people of influence in a business, they're just much easier to have, frankly. So it did a review, came up with a few things. There's some issues, some things were good, which is kind of nice as well, that it doesn't just tell you what's problematic, it also tells you what works well. And again, some of it is locked. So this was interesting to see the limitations from a membership or subscription perspective. The things here down the side, you'll see have little locks around it. But this one here, you get quite thorough information. So if you're ever having to do kind of analysis between maybe a primary competitor, this could be quite a nice tool to lean on. But as I said, majority of it is actually locked behind a subscription-based model. It's not super inexpensive, but I think from my perspective, it would be possible that you might be able to lean on an L&D budget, because it does give you some kind of additional training. So you could kind of wrap up that as one proposition. It also works with Figma, which is really interesting to see. So you bring in the plugin, and then you can kind of bring in these cards. They look like this. These are kind of heuristic cards, and then you can expand on them. They'll tell you a little bit about what's good, what isn't, or why that is a useful thing to think about in your design. It feels like it's still being developed, not properly developed, but it feels like there's still a little bit more work to do. And again, I think the challenge was that just you don't have everything available unless you pay for it. The next stage within Discover is kind of understanding and defining the problem. So we've understood it, we've got some help from different sources on that, but now we need to kind of get that alignment. And again, this involves other people and teams, so it's not always straightforward. I mean, sometimes it is. It's a really small thing that you're designing for, but if we take a more complex example, then it's a better place to learn, because you can take that into lots of different organizations. There are some really great tools to do this. So I guess what we're talking about is, how do you bring people together to get onto the same page? And from a complex example, you've got people in lots of different teams across an organization. They probably work in silos. They don't talk to each other. They may not get alignment and agreement from their own managers. So I think the role of a designer is actually really powerful when you can bring people together into the same room. And I have seen this and had feedback from people across different specialties where this is really, really successful relationship building. There's lots of tools available for this. It will depend on the place that you work, what you have access to. Miro is generally pretty accessible financially if you're not in a workplace, as is FigJam, because it's part of Figma. And they're all very similar in terms of some of the offerings that they have now. And they're great. So as an example, workshops, they can take a long time to set up. They can take a long time to run, and they can then take a long time to have your all your notes and learnings being processed. It's a lot of effort, is the reality, but and you don't always have the time to do them. But my goodness, these can really, really help speed that up now. So initially you might have boards where you had lots of sticky notes on, and you even had the structure of all of your different sessions that you might run to get alignment. Maybe it's about understanding the user types. Maybe it's about understanding the problem. UXPilot, as an example, as does Miro and FigJam, they have already pre-existing boards, which you have probably come across. So that already helps to define the structure of the workshop. And then, of course, how do you get these notes without those being processed? Well, what's really nice is Miro Assist. Actually, you can have that GPT interface already within it, and you can have a conversation and ask it around these user types. So even if you don't have the information already available, you can use it to start building that out, and it will then generate sticky notes for you. You can then use that to cluster. It will cluster it for you. If you're starting from a place where you've got lots of verbatim, insights, statistics, all sorts of different kinds of information, again, it can cluster it and find themes and analyze it. It will do sentiment analysis and save you lots of time. The other thing that's really nice is after the workshop, it can produce a summary for you. Again, this can be quite labor intensive. And just kind of, it doesn't mean it's the final thing, but it's something for you to then review and add in your notes to, and then kind of beef it up. And it's just super helpful. Some of the newer features that are starting to emerge, these tools are really, really beginning to blend. So Figma, I would say their real estate is kind of being encroached from these other tools. And the reason I say that is because Miro now has features where you can create the prototype within it. Actually can generate the design and then create kind of this flow. That's not the only tool that's doing that. So it's interesting to see how these are all starting to become more blended tools, slightly more hybrid. So the whiteboarding tools and the collaboration and the real time, and now with the AI on top of it, are super powerful. They help you to really, really speed up your discovery, get alignment. You can run mini sessions, probably just between you and another designer, even just you processing your own insights. Of course, you can do it in isolation, but super great for just speeding up that process. There's other tools, of course, available. You probably heard of Dovetail. ChatGPT can do some of these things as well. What I have observed is that, like anything, there's tools to do specific things, and they sometimes are better than other tools. So as you start to experiment more, you'll probably find the same thing. But I'll try and kind of speed that up for you, and then you can build on that as other tools come in, and they chop and change a bit, which they tend to do. So the next stage, ideate and test, exploring various ways to execute and take your ideas forward. So this is where you're looking at lots of different ideas that you're creating, because you now know and understand what the problem is, who it's for, and there's probably been some solutions that are starting to be thrown around. Sometimes you've even got a solution that's already been brought to you from a stakeholder. So the goal is for you to explore those options so you don't narrow in too fast on just the first one. And Figma does that pretty good in terms of their AI tools. I wouldn't say they're the most amazing AI design tool. It's not the one I lean on, that's for sure. I've tried it a few times every now and then, and I'm always slightly disappointed. But it will get better because it will be learning. Their tool is called First Draft. That helps with your kind of initial wireframe. I always start with the UX. I know there's a huge temptation now just to go straight to the UI and make it look really good. I would advise you not to. The reason is because as you're starting to go through the initial UX phase, you are kind of unlocking what the content is. The content will define the UX will then help to define the UI. And if you jump over these things, you'll generally find there's lots of holes and gaps and things that aren't really explored properly. And then that runs the risk of it going into delivery, into development. You're also processing stuff. You're processing the hierarchy, the messaging, the communication. And that gets hard to do when it's so polished and people do not look at things properly. Stakeholders don't look at things properly. People who are reviewing the content won't look at it properly because it's just hard to focus because there's so many things to look at. So I always try and stick with the UX first, and that goes for any kind of plugin that I'm using where it's got the option of lo-fi and hi-fi. But yeah, I'm sure others have had some experience already using it. My preferred plugin, which we're going to kind of go back a bit more into, is UXPilot. I'm a bit of a fan. I tried a lot of different AI tools within Figma that had plugins, and I just find this one is my go-to on a daily basis now. So I'll tell you a bit more about that one. It has its own platform, which is definitely stronger when it comes to the execution than it is in the plugin, but they are complementary. So you can use the plugin, so you can use the platform experience to start to build your design. And there's a screen after this where I'll show you the interface and we'll talk through what that looks like. So it's becoming a bit more familiar to you. And towards the end, I also have added some links for some tests that you can do with scripts and some really good resources on YouTube. I quite often follow a particular designer who seems to also be a bit of a UXPilot fan. So once you've done your design within the plugin, and we'll go back and look at what that looks like, you can then use the Figma plugin to pull that into Figma and take it further. Actually, there's some really good updates to this now because you can actually kind of push them backwards and forwards according to what you're doing. So now if you've got a high fidelity design in Figma that's already done, maybe it's from a previous designer, maybe it's part of a different flow, you can actually push that back into UXPilot much more easily than you used to. Previously, you had to export it out and then import it in. Now you can just kind of push it, and it kind of keeps the editable aspect as well. So it's as I said, that they're getting really kind of like blurred in terms of the boundaries between these tools, the way that they're interacting with each other. UXPilot also has workshop capabilities, so you can also do something similar with some of the whiteboarding tools where you can define workshops and work within those. I haven't used those so much, to be honest. They look really good. They provide really nice structures. It's just not something that's come up recently. You can also use it to create proto personas. So this is an interesting topic, which I'll probably go more into in another session, but this is kind of using the tool to help create a kind of idea of what that user type might be, where you maybe don't have data to drive those. So it's made up. That's why it's a proto persona. But sometimes with design, to move through the process, you do have to make things up. It's just part of assumptions, hypotheses, testing it out, improving on the solution that you have. I don't think they're a replacement though for real persona work, and that's because there are risks around making too many assumptions with your design, especially where nobody else maybe challenges it. So sometimes you're going to have to be the guardian of what the decisions are that you make and how you use certain AI tools. I think they're really great to be used in combination. I do tend to use this one more than others, but it all just depends on the work that you're doing at the time. So what does it look like? It has this kind of interface. This is one of the guys that I follow, so I'm going to put his details into the chat after this. He does some really great YouTube videos and tutorials, which you can watch more slowly and kind of follow along, and you can copy and paste in the prompts and do it with the tutorial, which I think is super helpful. This is a quick screenshot from one of his tutorials just to show you and talk you through it. But you can, starts off where you can give the option of creating a wireframe, and then if you want to, you can then take that wireframe into high fidelity. Obviously, you can go straight into high fidelity as well, but we talked about the reasons why it's not always ideal. And then you can give the option to kind of explore different styles. So this is a very particular style that he's selected. You can also add in your own pattern libraries. I'm not quite sure how far it goes on the design system side, but it's interesting that you can start to use your existing components. That I think is not a relatively new feature, but when I looked at it initially, it was a little bit in its infancy. Some of the newer things that are out now, as I mentioned, so you can push the designs into and from Figma in a much more seamless way. You could do that before, but it's just they've made a few things more easily. You can take notes. They've updated the dashboard. There's some responsive elements that are new, which is really nice. So you can now prompt it to create a responsive design. I think it does some things automatically, but this makes it better. And there's a few other things. One thing I like about UXPilot is they're quite often pushing out new features. And unlike some of the other tools, they're actually well built. They're well designed. And I think that maybe that's because of the community they serve, but it's not always the case with others where they kind of are pushing things out very quickly and sometimes the quality isn't great. So when you're using UXPilot, one of the things I would recommend is using the deep design aspect here. That to me gives the best output. And when you're trying to work at a certain speed, you might as well just go straight to the best quality output that you can. It is based on credits. You can get access to it for free. I subscribe because I tested it out for a while and I thought the value was really high. So I have a subscription that I use, and it kind of takes a certain number of credits depending on what you're doing. Autoflow, I haven't had loads of success with that, but it depends on what you're doing. It creates you like series of screens. It's all to do with the inputs. So if your inputs aren't clear, then the outputs won't be clear. So it's sometimes a little bit of like massaging the prompt to get the thing that you want. How I work is I tend to use it as a starting point. I love some of the ideas that it comes up with. They're things that I would have not thought about or not executed in that particular way. Some of them are great, some of them are not. Some of them are like really bad, some of them are really good. So it's just like working with maybe a junior designer, but a really smart junior designer. And then you can take particular aspects of your design and you can kind of explore that further. So you can kind of break it out and then you can put it back together again in Figma. That tends to be how I work. Rather than having the whole thing done, I tend to take like cuts of the different ways of doing something, and then I explore it further in Figma where I can have more kind of flexibility with different things happening. But I suspect these worlds will kind of blend a bit as this becomes more of a stronger design tool. One of the other things they do now is interaction. So if you wanted a pop-up, you could have the user select something, the window pops up, the user closes that button. So we're starting to lean into like more prototyping style tools, which is really interesting to see how this all works out. Creating the final tested solution, I mean, this is not like cut and dry because I think the reality is you'll probably get a sense these tools can be used in quite a few different places. But again, kind of touching on UXPilot, and I've done this. This was quite an interesting comparison between another tool called Galileo. I haven't used it myself, but I was interested to see how they stood up against each other. This is quite a good comparison to see because the difference in the execution is vast. You'll look at this initially and go, oh, that looks pretty interesting, and yeah, that could be usable. But this is it with AI, a bit like when you look at lots of high fidelity, Instagram pictures, when you really look at things, they quite often are broken or they don't make sense, or it's like, how would that work though? It just doesn't connect. The UX is normally substandard. The UX here is a lot stronger. You can see that from the detail that it's taking into account. I don't know if it's perfect, I'd have to look deeper into it, but already the comparison between the two, you can see it's taken it to another level. Play around with it. Chances are these models will change. They're all competing against each other for market share. A slightly different kind of tool, but one, again, I see that designers often struggle with typography and choosing colors. They really struggle with colors. That's not a surprise. It takes a lot of time to learn how to color select and what works, and understanding color theory. However, great thing is we have these tools now. So Chroma is just one that I really loved the usage of this. It's a really nice interface. It has some quite basic features, but quite strong features. The downside is you do have to spend a little bit of time up front selecting all these colors that you think are relevant to the thing that you're on. And I mean, a lot. I think it was like 40 colors you're going through and selecting. It takes some time. However, the outcome is helpful. You can see the combinations that it comes back with, and you're able to then choose the kind of visualization of that in different ways. So this is an image card, this is a typography card, so you can kind of start to check things like accessibility, and then it gives you kind of color combinations. There's lots and lots of tools that do this. There's ones in Adobe, there's others. So you've probably come across some already. This was specifically kind of an AI driven tool. They're AI driven, but you could kind of get a feel that it was analyzing some of the combinations and then coming up with ideals. I did want to touch on testing with proto personas, but it's quite a big space. So we're going to probably save it for another session. This is where you might use the tools to build or create a persona. And it's understandably why you would do that, because it's very difficult at the moment to test with users if you don't have access to them. More so if you're in a B2B environment where your customers are hard to find or hard to get hold of, or not really that interested in sitting in on a user research session. Bit easier if you're on the consumer side. But still, it's work to do, it's a thing to do. Designers don't always have the time. So there's a couple of options, and I'll just quickly talk them through, but I won't go into the detail just yet. The first one, as we've mentioned and discussed already, is to do with using what's already available, that's free information, and to build something and create something that you can use to talk to. That is actually already a great start, considering you might go from not having any really much knowledge, you might not have any qual or quant insights, to having something where you know a little bit about the users. The other option, which is a bit trickier, is but better in terms of the results, is where you add in as much research as possible that you have, and it could be call logs, it could be data, into a model. You are effectively building a model of your user type, and you can have multiple personas, and it could probably process them all for you itself if you don't have the information divided. The challenge with that is that it's sensitive IP information, and a business will probably not want you doing that, of course, because it makes it accessible, because it's training the models, even if you pay for the tools. If you pay for ChatGPT, you'd have to go in. There's a very specific setting to change to turn off training the model. So it's worth understanding how the information you put into these models is then exposed, even if you're paying for it. It's not until you're on normally enterprise versions, which are very, very expensive, where your data is not training the model or a bit more protected. Most companies don't want you to do this because they haven't yet got their house in order with how they want to be treating AI and the models they're using and the platforms they're using. So be very, very careful with information that you add in where it's IP to the company, because you could be breaching kind of security and data protocol. I have seen this work very effectively, though, when you are allowed to. So one of the courses I did last year was an AI course, and it was more specific to do with digital marketing, and they were using this to really, really hone in on their customer, so that all the sales messaging, all the marketing messaging was absolutely in line with higher conversion rates. And they showed the kind of testing of the different kinds, and it was about, they said, 80% accurate to real customer info, which was just amazing considering the time it took in comparison to actual testing. They did put a lot of data in. It's worth knowing. They put a lot of information in, everything that they could possibly find that was relevant, and they had access to that. So it made it very easy. And they were a small team, so there was less kind of protocol to go through to get access to that information and to make sure it was okay. So the context will play a huge role. It will be slightly more difficult if you're not a senior manager, you don't have access to the information, or if you're in a large corporate. Those things will be barriers to doing some of these things quick. But you've always got the option to lean on information that's already publicly available. And that will obviously be more challenging when you're talking to B2B customers, but not impossible. There's still information out there in threads and forums, social media that can be pulled into one of these tools. ChatGPT, again, features, it's an easy go-to, isn't it? And most people probably using it already by now. But really useful for actually also creating new user stories. Now, the user stories can be created before and after the design. It depends on the process that you're in. But even if you're just doing it for you, it's quite helpful because you're kind of breaking it down. And that's useful when the features and functionality that go into your design all have to be built. So being conscious about what goes in, what doesn't, the prioritization of that gets you thinking like a better designer. A product owner will thank you because you're then thinking more like they are. They have to protect what goes in and out of the design. And if you're helping them do that already and thinking more like a business style designer, then you will be definitely already ahead of many others. So kind of as an overview, the pain points, obviously, sometimes getting started with an idea, having a design partner when you may be working in isolation. Maybe you don't want to ask questions because you don't want to be seen like you don't know what you're doing. You can use all these tools to help with that, to help instigate things, to help have the conversation, to help cluster ideas, break things down. It will take a lot longer the first time. It won't feel like you're saving time. It will feel like it's the opposite. But if you think of it as being like a scalable solution, it will very quickly manifest into something that will reduce your time within your workflow. So stick with it. So top tips, prompting, use AI tools, but be really clear that your inputs will affect your outputs, and so play around with different kinds of prompts. Sometimes it's quite easy to put a prompt in and then realize that it's like not very good in terms of the output, but quite often it's because either the model is still being trained or it's still early on, or your prompt was maybe a bit vague. I love it how you can use AI to help with your refinement of your wireframes. Use it as like a senior designer or a colleague where it's kind of giving you feedback, like how might I make this communicate better? What other options are there for displaying this thing? You can dig into the design. You can use things like UXPilot or the AI tools in Figma to do that. And just experimenting with the tools in general, it's worth putting some time aside for your own L&D and building that as part of your own process to always just see what's on the market, what's happening, what tools have got better, which ones have disappeared, so that you're always, as a designer, staying on top of trends. And as mentioned before, there are some things to be aware of. It's really important. You're making decisions as a designer, what goes into a design and what doesn't. And if you're using AI tools, they're not always accurate. You have to do your own due diligence. You have to review your own work, its work sometimes, and your work. Doesn't always understand context. The language isn't always right. Sometimes it's a bit kind of confused. Sometimes you want it to do something and it does the complete opposite. It's not perfect. You still are the person that design has to go through, and you have to still have do your own due diligence around it. This is really interesting. It was an article, a great article I read on the interactiondesign.org site, which again alluded to previously around different industries. So in healthcare, one wrong assumption could mean a misdiagnosis or a delayed care. You can't afford to design from data averages. People's lives aren't typical. In finance, your work can shape how people save, spend, or recover from debt. Only real conversations reveal the fears and trade-offs that spreadsheets can't. And finally, for marginalized users, AI might erase the very voices you should amplify. Relying solely on synthetic personas can blind you to the people most in need of thoughtful design. Now, whilst you might not be in these industries yet, or maybe you are, these, I think, just really kind of bring it back to why AI will not replace us. It's still really, really important that you look at everything on your design and agree that that's the right thing to do, not just from a technical delivery perspective, but also, more importantly, from an ethical perspective. Is this serving my users? Is this serving the smallest groups? And this kind of ties back into inclusive design. And that's why it's important for you to always be the final kind of reviewer. So key takeaways: AI won't take your job. It's really important that we're always combining empathy, creativity, and AI efficiency. Always be familiar with the benefits, but also the limitations. AI doesn't replace complex requirements. I mean, there's been quite a few times where I just haven't bothered. And the reason is because it's some things within your world will be so complex when you're taking initial briefs that it's, you know what, the go-to is talking to people, and that AI can't replace that. Quality of AI tools really varies, and the more you're kind of experimenting, playing around with things, the more you'll see that as well. And just start small, just test out one thing so it's not overwhelming. I am going to look a bit more at proto-personas in another session and lean a bit more on lean user research, and also look at customer personas and journey mapping, user testing, and font selection, which are all other things which there's not enough time to touch on just yet, but let's see how we go. Please stay connected. Look me up on LinkedIn.